Welcome to the Rounds Complete podcast, where we pull back the curtain on what it's like to serve and discuss ways in which we can better support those that did. On behalf of the entire Rounds Complete team, I wanted to welcome you to the podcast and to our new channel. We've just got done editing the pilot. We weren't completely sure we were going to share this one since this was our very first time doing something like this. But after sharing the edit with a couple of friends and family, we decided to go for it. So while this podcast is grounded in this idea that we're anything but rounds complete when it comes to ensuring veterans get the help and support they need, and that frankly they earned, this first pilot episode is more of an introduction to your hosts. Steve and I have known each other for more years than I care to publicly admit. And to do this with my best friend is both fun and incredibly rewarding. Steve is a great storyteller, and he's completely open about his experiences. I think most folks will connect with his story rather quickly. In this episode, you'll learn a little bit more about who we are and when and where we served and what we ultimately hope to do with this platform. There's a lot more to come, and we're really excited that you're along for the ride. So without further ado, enjoy the show. I don't think I've ever actually this question, but something you just said triggered. Like, why did you join in the first place? What was your?
Oh,
what was your
okay. I
reason?
mean, that's a great question. So my family has a long history of service. You know, sometimes it's long, sometimes it's short, sometimes it's storied, sometimes it's just, really simple. My father served in the Army. I was born at Fort Bragg. I was literally a Bragg baby. Cape Fear Valley Medical Center. Yeah, baby. He did 4 years, right? In the 80s. And, but before that, before he was in the Army, he was a paramedic. And before that, he was a volunteer firefighter. And after he left the military, he was a sheriff's deputy. And then, he flew helicopters for, medical helicopter service. You know, my grandfather, my great uncle, um, you know, several great uncles, actually. I have a great uncle who was KIA in Korea, was missing for decades, if I recall correctly, unaccounted for decades. So I have a long history, I mean, of service in my family. My parents had service-oriented jobs when I was growing up. My mom worked in a doctor's office. She worked in a school. She met my dad as an EMT. So I mean, it was kind of instilled in me from early on that the highest calling is service to others. And of course, I was in high school when 9/11 happened, right? Which makes me feel really old now. But
There are
I was,
adults who can drink that were not
yeah.
alive during that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I was in high school when 9/11 happened, and
Where were you? Like, do you remember where you were in high school? Like,
Oh, I remember exactly where I was. I was in astronomy class in high school in
you had
10th grade, I
astronomy
think.
class in high school?
Oh yeah. Because I was cool. Yeah.
Ask your wife about that.
Yeah.
Hey,
that's when we started dating, so I must have been cool enough. What about you?
I was walking class. I do not remember what class I was, but we had like this commons area, and I was probably like on a free period or just transitioning class, and we had these little like those old like box TVs, and they weren't flat screens anywhere. Like these box TVs hanging from these mounts on the ceiling. And when everybody stopped, like they emptied the classrooms, we all kind of poured into the cafeteria and the commons area and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And we just, a similar story. I think I kind of joke that every generation has had somebody who has served, or at least one.
Yeah.
In my generation, I just drew the short straw. My brother was the brains in the family, so like he became an engineer and got super smart. Went to Clarkson.
Sure.
He majored in like aeronautical engineering for his undergrad, so he was building components like secret. He had a security clearance. He was like building components to the Apache or something like that.
Yeah.
My mom was a reservist. My dad was on active duty. My stepfather was a reservist. My grandfather on my dad's side served in Korea. My dad was in Vietnam. My mother was in Desert Storm and in Iraq 1. And Iraq. No, sorry, Desert Storm was Iraq 1. She was in Desert Storm and Iraq 2. I was in Afghanistan. Like we did the whole like Ancestry.com family lineage thing. There was like
And it just goes all the way back. Yeah.
Civil War we skipped.
Yeah.
We just like nobody was of age or whatever during the Civil
Uh,
War. But yeah, on my dad's side, where you can kind of trace our ancestry and our immigration to the United States back before like we
yeah.
were a country. It's like every war except the Civil War. So I remember really adamantly though, like my senior year in high school, my mother she was in the reserves. She was like a battalion command sergeant major by this point. So I
Yeah.
think she lived in it was like she was on active duty. She
Yeah.
just didn't have to put a uniform on every day, but like general
Right.
officers would be at my dinner table every other weekend for whatever purposes. Um, and I remember, I got accepted into college. It was a private school. Nobody ever told me that if I was just going to be a history major, that I should go to a state school. So I went to a private school instead, and it was going to be an arm and a leg for tuition. And
Yeah.
my mother turned around and said, "You should try ROTC." And I said, "That's your thing, not mine. Like I don't want anything to do with the military. I don't. I think I told her I don't want to. I'm not like you, is what I told her.
Oh,
Yeah, it went over
if
real well.
only you had listened.
Yeah, that went over really well. And then she said, "Fine, I'm not going to co-sign loans for you. You're going to figure out how to pay for college. And by the way, if you're not in school, you're going to start paying rent, or you're going to get out of my house, right?" And I was like, "Okay, cool." So I signed up for ROTC, right? I didn't apply for the scholarship. I just signed up as an elective.
Yeah.
My mother tells the story best, but I went off to like my first like field training exercise, whatever you call it, FTX. But
Yeah.
come on, it was the military. It was not
Yeah.
the military. It was
Oh, no, no,
ROTC.
no.
And it's like I think I'm in Chestnut Ridge Park. Lots of hills. It's raining. It's cold because it's Buffalo, New York. My mother, she tells the story. She's like, "That's it. Like he tried. There's no way he's going to enjoy that. Like
Yeah.
my son loves his creature comforts. Like this, but he tried. Right? That was the deal.
Sure. Yeah.
I came home and I was so excited, and I talked about wanting to enlist and take a break in school and go experience what the real army was like. And she said, "Hell no, you're going to finish school."
Yeah.
But yeah, that was I ate my words on that one pretty hard.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say it was similar for me because I planned to do ROTC when I went to college. Like I said, my dad was in the army. And, I told him as I was getting closer to graduation from high school, I was like, like, I'm thinking about joining the military. Right. And he said, all right, well, you want to serve your country. I think that's wonderful. He's like, if you want to go serve and you want to give back to your community and your country, I think that's great. He said, I'm going to give you two pieces of advice from a former E4 in the army. He said, one, don't join the army. He said, join the Marines or the Air Force, right? He said, because the Air Force, they treat their people well, right? And he's like, they have the best accommodations that, they treat you like a human being. It's nice. And he's like, the Marines treat you like crap, but there's this like shared pride, like it's on purpose, right? It's like, we're gonna live in the mud and we're gonna, eat crap and we're gonna, but it's like on purpose. There's a reason behind it, and they all take pride in it. He said the army's gonna treat you like crap, um, just because they don't care. And he said, don't enlist, be an officer. Take it from an E4. He's like, you should be an officer, right? And so I took half of his advice, and I almost didn't. I almost didn't. I was real tight with the recruiter that would hang out at our high school, um, and even to the point where I went to MEPS to enlist in the reserves, and it didn't materialize. And
I'm gonna go back
so,
to you were like 100 pounds soaking wet back in the day, so I just assumed
oh, I
that
was about $1.15. Don't
like you
short me.
like you needed to like put sand in your pockets just to make
Yeah,
weight.
yeah. Um, but but I ended up not enlisting. And the plan was to like do the reserves and also go to school. And so similar to you, I wound up at a expensive private college. Mine was in Jersey. Um, but I knew like I got there, I went to orientation, and like the first table I went to was ROTC, and I was like, sign me up. And so I did, and I didn't. The scholarships were short in those days, um, and so I ended up not getting a scholarship until I think my junior year. So I still came out of it with a decent bit of debt, not as much as a lot of people came out of that school.
It took me 2 deployments to Afghanistan to pay mine off.
Yeah, yeah. Mm. Anywho, but yeah, so and it's funny because as you know, and a lot of people may or may not know, depending on their experiences, when you're an ROTC, when you're a cadet, as you go through your junior year, you start thinking about what branch of the Army you want to serve in, right? Whether it's infantry or armor or aviation or intelligence or engineers or what have you, right?
And for folks like who don't know how that works, like you put in a request. The Army
Yeah,
considers you satisfied if you get like the top, I forgot what it was, but it was like one of your
yeah,
first 4 or 5 choices.
yeah. And the
Um,
Army should never consider me satisfied, but uh, and for the longest time, I was like, I want to be infantry, right? I want to be infantry.
that's the right answer, by the way.
Yeah. Well, then I went on a ruck march, and I went, this sucks. I don't want to do that. And so I was like, well, you know, why carry your weapon when your weapon can carry you? I'm going to go armor. And so
Actually, that was your first choice.
so my first choice was actually military intelligence with what's called a branch detail to armor. And you know what that is, but a lot of people probably don't. And what that means is so military intelligence, they don't need a lot of lieutenants, right? They don't need a lot of junior officers. There's just not really jobs for a lot of junior officers. There's some.
It was always explained as like this pyramid, right? Where like
Right.
some branches
Infantry,
you needed a lot of
yeah.
lieutenants, very
Yeah, and
few
it's the pyramid, yeah.
colonels.
So you need a lot of people at the bottom and not as many at the top. And MI is not really like that. Military intelligence isn't really like that. But um, armor, which is the combat arms branch of decision,
Hmm,
um,
it's debatable.
they do need a lot of junior officers, but they don't need as many senior officers, right? It's a pyramid. And so a lot of times what they'll do is they will branch detail somebody that they're like home branches intel or signal or logistics or what have you. They'll branch them over to armor or infantry, um, so that one, they can fill out those lower ranks of officers, and two, you can get combat experience. You can get experience of what the warfighter needs from their support officers, and then when you transfer over to your home branch, you're more useful, right? Because you can support the guys and gals with the rifles on the line better. And so that's what I was. Yeah, I was like, yeah, because my plan had been to switch out of the army and end up in the intelligence community somewhere, right? Like I was like, I'm gonna
Working for some
be.
3-letter agency.
Yeah. I was like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
go work for CIA or DIA or NSA or one of them spook shows, right? And so that was the plan, and obviously did not work out that way. But yeah, so I what I did was I went, hey, Army, I'll strike a deal with you because you could do this. I said, if you guarantee me MI detailed to armor, I will give you 7 years instead of 4. And so I took what's called an ADSO, an active duty service obligation. Um,
And you ad-sewed for the detail.
I ADSO'd for MI branch detail to armor.
Because
Yes,
I also had a detail, but it was
it
their
was
way
just
of
cause.
branch
Yeah,
satisfying me.
yeah,
I forgot how many branches there were at the time, but like air defense artillery was, if not the last on my list,
yeah.
like very close to the last on my list.
Oh
It
yeah,
it just didn't have a wartime mission. Not to like
not in that war.
degrade any defender. I
Yeah,
think they call themselves
yeah,
defenders.
yeah,
It's just there wasn't like it was. I
yeah,
remember going like while I was in college, thinking I'm gonna miss the war. I'm gonna miss the war because I was that naive at the time.
yeah. Like that would
Um,
have been a terrible thing, right?
right. But super anxious about all. I was hungry. I wanted it. I
Yeah.
joined. And my first choice was infantry. The correct branch. Uh, I was branch detailed to the infantry for 4 years,
Mhm,
similar to you. But I
mhm,
was branch detailed from air defense artillery.
mhm.
And so I almost got out of the military when I finished my
Your
kind of
infantry time.
pre-command course in the first 4
Yeah.
years. Like I didn't do an ADSO, so I could have gotten off active duty after 4 years. At the time, I was forward deployed to Afghanistan. This is my second deployment. I was actually a battalion S4, and I had submitted my UQR, my unqualified resignation. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I had hit some command and staff slides somewhere. Our brigade support battalion, or BSB commander, came by. He was visiting our FOB at some point, and he goes, he brought me to lunch in our little DFAC, our little like inflatable tent. And he sat me down and he's like, "Hey, Captain Poe, what's going on? And I saw your name. Like, why are you getting out?" I told him I had, no interest going to air defense artillery. And I think there were other reasons why I was thinking about getting out, but that was the one I told him. And he goes, "Well, hey, you're not screwing up this S4 thing so bad. What about a career in logistics?" And I said, "Hey, sir, I checked it." Because every year they publish this list and it says, these are the branches that are open for you to transfer into or out of, right? And
Yeah.
there's like toll gates along the way. Well, infantry, I think infantry wasn't letting people out because there weren't enough people in the infantry. And although I was air defense artillery, I probably should have looked at that one. And logistics wasn't letting people in because I think they were full, or close enough to full. And his name was, I don't know if I can drop his name on this, but his name was then Colonel Hellwig. He's General Hellwig now, but Colonel Hellwig, or Lieutenant Colonel Hellwig at the time, and he turned around and he told me, "Don't worry about that. If you want a transfer in logistics, like let me make a phone call." And I remember, like, I submitted my packet anyway, and Colonel Hogue and I went on PTO together, like not together, like we left Afghanistan at the same time,
Yeah.
to go on PTO. And so I had my BlackBerry, I had my government BlackBerry with me. Get
Fancy.
the cell phone bill on that thing, by the way, when you carry it in Afghanistan. I had my government BlackBerry on me. And I remember I was shopping with a friend at like a department store. I don't know why, on R&R. And did I say PTO earlier? R&R. And the list came out from the Department of Energy, because you're not allowed to get like your government email on like any device. You have to use the government issued devices.
Yeah.
And I remember it came out, and my name wasn't on that. I'm like using that little ball to scroll through the list on the BlackBerry, and my name just wasn't on the list. And so I think I shot a text or an email to Colonel Elwig and just said, "Hey, sir, I appreciate the effort. The list came out, I wasn't on it."
Yeah.
And he gave me a call, and he just said, like, he asked me a question or two, and he said, "Just stand by." He hung up the phone. I'm still like, we've moved 3 racks down from like these clothing racks, right? And I get an email. It's the weirdest email. It's from an official like HRC email account, but like I think one of the generic ones, and it says, "Captain Poe, your branch transfer request to logistics score has been approved. Standby for orders. Very respectively, HRC." That's all it said. Like,
Wow.
you would receive that today, and you would like report that for phishing.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like
That would go straight to the IT guy.
yeah. But I don't know, Colonel. I don't know the whole story. I assume like when he had a former boss, I was like the chief of logistics or something at the time. But he totally, I mean, he set my career up. I'm still in supply chain and logistics to this day.
Yeah.
I just, not wearing a uniform every day.
Yeah.
He completely changed my life. But yeah, that's how I became not an air defender.
Which is
Not to,
fortunate for you.
like I said, not to say anything bad about that community. Like it's
Yeah.
it's not something I wanted to do.
I think that just kind of highlights how times change and circumstances change. I mean, not just for you personally, but talking about air defense. I mean, you go to Afghanistan and we didn't really have much of an air threat. Even in Iraq, there was not really an air threat. And don't get me wrong, they were still doing stuff in that time, right? I mean, we had air defense units in Okinawa and
Europe,
Israel, and
yeah, 100%.
all over the Middle East, and but it wasn't where the quote unquote where the fight was, right? And so, but it's funny if you look at it, even today, air defenders are, I want to say, if not the most, they are, if they are not the most, they are one of the most deployed MOSs in the Army, because there's such a high demand for that mission, and there are so few people to fill it that they are just constantly rotating. I mean, constantly. And of course, it's not always bad places. I mean, Okinawa is a dream, but it's a serious mission. And but in what we graduated and commissioned in '07, right? That wasn't where the fight was. It wasn't, nobody wanted to go to Kuwait. Nobody wanted to go to Okinawa. If you were joining the military at that point, like you were joining it, it's not like we had a draft going on. Like you were joining because you were like, well, I'm you joined knowing that you were going to Iraq or Afghanistan, right? Like that was a very, very big possibility. But if you were an air defender, you probably weren't. And so, it was, we wanted to go.
Yeah, I'm curious to pick your brain. Like, how did that evolve for you? So I know for me, again, I was naive, pre any type of combat experience. I think you're hungry for it. And then when you get to your first unit, like you're the green lieutenant. I was a
Yep.
infantry platoon leader in the 10th Mountain Division. I was fortunate in the sense that so every time a unit comes back from a deployment, everybody scatters, right? They go off to different
Right.
training, they go off to different
Yeah.
courses, they all get them.
They PCS into
They
a different
PCS to other duty
unit. Yeah.
stations. My platoon was the last platoon in the last company to be like refilled. So I got
Yeah.
like a lot of new folks. Like there were a lot of folks who slick sleeves, right? The folks who didn't
Sure.
have the
Yeah.
combat patch on. I had my NCOs did for sure, most of them at least. My platoon sergeant, a guy named Sergeant Jeffers. This dude was, I couldn't imagine my military career without knowing
Yeah.
Sergeant Jeffers. That dude was awesome.
Yeah.
He taught me a lot. But like at some point, you're trying to like it shifts, right? It's now it's like trying to prove yourself. Like you need that experience, right, to fit in or be part of that.
Yeah.
Because I do think there's a little bit of a deployed, not deployed, combat
Oh,
veteran,
yeah.
non-combat veteran. Like
Yeah.
there's that stigma a little bit. And then you get there and it becomes about, it's no longer about the hua whatever. It's no longer about like the folks who are chasing glory end up getting themselves or somebody else hurt or killed, right? It's not
Yeah.
about any of that.
Yeah.
It becomes
Or they
about,
get ostracized because nobody wants to get
because
killed.
nobody wants to be around that.
Yeah.
It just became about making sure that every single one of my guys came home. Like
Yeah.
that's all it was about. Every decision, every mission, it was about, we're going to do what we got to do here, but I am bringing every single one of these dudes home. And we,
Yeah. Yeah.
because we took care of each other, but there were some close calls for
Oh,
sure.
yeah. 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 You had one yourself.
I did.
And
We'll
you
get into
carried
that.
it with you for a long time.
But I'm fortunate that like my wound was physically the worst anyone in my platoon experienced, which is I wouldn't have had any other way.
Absolutely. And it was still it was what they call $1 million wound.
It was.
But the Army must have kept that money.
Wound. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Although, okay, and for anybody playing the home game, because it's easy to forget that this is for an audience when I'm just talking to you, but Dave and I were deployed to Afghanistan at the same time. Like he said, my AO was the next one north of his, or my squadron's AO. But I remember, there's a lot I don't remember because brain damage, but I remember being in like the MWR shack and being on the the little computers and chatting with my wife, and she was like, Dave got shot. And I was like, what? What do you mean Dave got shot? I'm freaking out, right?
I think I posted it on Facebook.
You did. You posted it somewhere, I think. I want to say
email Facebook. Or Facebook, one of the two.
Or you emailed the picture or something, but I remember you emailing the picture of your upper inner thigh. And it was just like, oh, it was risque, that photo. But
I'll put it on, if I can find the photo, I'll put it on screen.
But it was
not
like
that
the
risque.
Cleanest, it was, listen, it got me going. But it was like the cleanest bullet wound I had ever seen. And I had seen some bullet wounds and I was like, oh, thank God, which felt like a weird thing to say. Like, oh my, thank God he got shot in the leg, but those are the kind of circumstances you find yourself in where you're like, oh, thank God my best friend got shot in the leg and not, in the dome or in the neck or whatever.
They ended up leaving it in. It was like it was sandwiched right between like that main artery, the femoral artery or whatever that runs down your leg and like a major nerve. And so they just left it.
Yeah. Which, that's the best way, I think.
They used like a turkey baster and shoved a bunch of like saline solution in the hole and then literally threw a gauze bandage on top of it and sent me back to work.
Yeah. Well, you finished the patrol. I mean,
It was like 3 hours. Yeah,
Yeah.
like from the moment I got shot to like the moment we left. So we were on a
Yeah.
MSR California at Hill 1311.
Mhm.
We had a traffic control point or a TCP set up. We were there for a couple of hours, and eventually, like anything else, we're a static army unit
Yeah.
with
Get shot at.
standoff between like the farm fields and the mountainside, and folks had come over the mountains and set up and started shooting at us. And I remember, I remember thinking like I wasn't doing what I was supposed to in the sense that like when people are shooting at you, you get small, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what
Which
they
has never
train
been
you.
an issue for me.
Yeah, you are like 5 feet tall. But you get small. You create a small target, a small silhouette, something that's hard to hit, and you
Yeah.
move or find cover or move
Yeah.
to cover.
Yeah.
Um,
Avoid the bullets. Yeah.
I don't know. This was August, so like I'm 6, 7, 8 months into the deployment. Like you're desensitized a lot to this, as
Oh,
scary as
very
that
much so.
sounds.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was standing there, and I got shot in the leg. And I like don't get me wrong, it wasn't like I was just standing there staring at things. Like I moved around. We had these big MRAPs which is big, just this big armor shield, and I couldn't see who was shooting at us. So I kind of stepped off to the side to see who was shooting at us, and I got tagged right in the leg. Had I gotten small, I that might have been my neck, right, or worse. Like I could have been lights out. It just
Yeah.
I didn't do what I was supposed to, but that might have been a good thing in the end. It's just funny how things work out sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I stayed there. It was like it was fine. Like the adrenaline takes over. I remember like looking down at my leg and be like, "Ah, that hurt." It felt like ricochets happen all the time. Like there's
Yeah.
rocks everywhere, and so I felt
Yeah.
like something had hit the rocks in front of me, and like this little pebble had bounced off my leg, and there
Yeah.
was this little tiny hole in my pants, but no blood.
Yeah.
And then I was like, "Oh, that hurt!" And I like rubbed my leg, and I started firing. And then I was talking on the radio, and I started firing, and I think my RTO said something to me, so I turn around and I'm talking to him. And at this point, I'm like, I'm properly behind the vehicle, like
Yeah.
not doing what I'm supposed to.
Lesson learned.
Um, and so I'm returning fire, and I look down, and now there's tiny little red ring around the hole, and I'm like, that really hurt, like,
Yeah.
ow. Um, go back to firing. I look down a couple of minutes later, and now the blood trail is down to my boot, and I'm like, oh, I should call the medic, right? It's traffic control point. My platoon medic's with my platoon sergeant. He's literally 200 meters away from me. So I have my RTO at the time, like whip out his IFAK or my IFAK, and he bandages me up. And eventually my medic comes over, and he takes off the bandage. He looks, oh yeah, sir, you got shot. And I was like, no, I didn't. And he's like, you got shot. I was like, no, I didn't. And I turned around, I looked at him, I'm like, you're taking it out. And I'm like, he's like, I'm not taking it out. Like, you're an idiot. Like, that's not
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
You've been deployed how many times?
Uh,
Because
well,
you eventually got out of, like, you were,
yeah, I did eventually switch over to MI. Um, I had two combat deployments, vastly different, and a couple of operational deployments.
I mean, your first one was
Um,
intense.
well, my first one was intense. Yeah, it was rather sporty. Um,
Sporty, that's one way to describe it.
yeah. So I did end up going armor, but armor branch has kind of a subcomponent, right? It's kind of split. There's pure armor, which is tanks, um, the Abrams tank, um, and there is everything else is cavalry. We don't ride horses anymore. We ride vehicles. Um,
Everybody rides vehicles, by the way. So it was like you
yeah,
wanted to
but
be the infantry.
well, no, I didn't, and it's funny because, and I'll get to that, but the point of cavalry is to conduct reconnaissance basically, and we're supposed to be out front looking for the enemy, gain and maintain contact, and then either we handle it ourselves or we do things like call for indirect fire, or we call for heavier units that come to support us, um, and cavalry like infantry is split into light and heavy. Um, Especially at that time, each brigade combat team had a cavalry squadron, and so if it was a heavy BCT, you had heavy cavalry, and if you were a light BCT, you had light cavalry. So I was like I don't want to go infantry anymore. I want to go armor. I want to ride around. I want to, I want to be off my feet and I don't want to carry a heavy pack. And that's funny because I ended up going to the only light BCT at Fort Carson, uh, where I remember a guy that graduated from my college 2 years ahead of me. He went there as a platoon leader, and so when I got orders going to that unit, I called him up because he had deployed with him and everything, and I was like, "Hey man," K Bar was his nickname. We called him K Bar. I was like, "K Bar, hey man, tell me all about the unit. Like, how are the Bradleys? How are the the big armored fighting vehicles, this the CFVs, the cavalry fighting vehicles, like how's everything going with that, what's your?" And he was like, "Bradleys, we don't have Bradleys, we have Humvees if we're lucky." And so I went to this unit.
Here's your rucksack.
Here's your rucksack, right? And we would do things like, oh, you're gonna ruck 6 miles to the range, and if you shoot expert, you get to ride back in a van, you know and if you don't, your ass is walking, right? Like,
Could you shoot?
um what's that?
Could you shoot?
Could I shoot? I could shoot very well. Yes. In
Just
fact,
asking.
I don't have it anywhere. I don't have it anywhere around me right now. I won the tactical stress shoot competition for the troop that I was in when it happened. I wasn't in a line troop at that point. I was in a forward support troop in the squadron, um, but which so not to disparage anybody that wasn't cavalry, but it was mechanics and cooks and things like that in the troop. So yeah, but only officer out of the whole squadron that won for his troop. But yeah, I could shoot like it's like a maniac, man. Um, Still can actually. Anywho,
You were also a mortar platoon leader. It was your second
yeah,
platoon, right?
and so that's funny. Well, no, I got to the unit. We were 175% on lieutenants, right? And lieutenants lead platoons. We were 175% on lieutenants. And so I got stuck in the S3 operations shop for like months. But that's where I got stuck. And it was actually kind of great because there were so many of us that like the S3 actual was like, it's 10 o'clock. I got nothing for you. Get out of my sight. Right. But anyway, so I did a spur ride, which is it's like EIB, but cooler, where you
I
have
was
to do all these
associated more with like prop blast, but
kind of,
you hate
yeah.
airborne as a method of insertion. So
I hate airborne just on principle. Yeah, I think it's anyway. That's a whole. We could do 2 hours on that, um, but it's all these different tasks and challenges and skill sets that you have that you demonstrate throughout the day. It's very long. It's very grueling. Different units do them differently. Ours had a prereq course that you had to go through, or not course, but you had to meet all these challenges before you could even do the spur ride. But I did a spur ride, ended up eventually getting a platoon. And it's funny because I had always been like, well, I don't want to be infantry anymore. Like, that's not for me. And I ended up being an infantry platoon leader. It was not a rifle platoon, but I did have a mortar platoon, and usually that's a second platoon leader
it
position.
is.
So
Yeah.
you go to a line platoon, what's considered a line platoon. So in the infantry, it'd be a rifle platoon. In the cavalry, it'd be a scout platoon. And if you prove yourself, then you get a mortar platoon, or in the infantry, you might get a scout platoon. But so I ended up being an infantry platoon leader. All my guys were 11 series; they were 11 Charlies, and I deployed as an infantry platoon leader. And I actually ended up staying as that platoon leader for 2 years. um, so I had a very long tenure as a PL. I took the platoon in, I want to say, September of '08, something like that.
That was
Um,
also your first deployment was also like your. So we talked about like military intelligence assets, and they don't have a lot of lieutenants, right? Like they're
yeah,
built a little more top heavy,
yeah,
a lot more analysts, that kind of stuff, right?
yeah,
And so we had this problem in Afghanistan where we couldn't collect. Like we needed somebody within each kind of company
yeah.
dedicated to like intel, but
Right,
companies don't have intel officers. Like
right,
battalions have S2s, companies do not, right? And so
right.
we had these like COIST teams.
Yes, and so this was actually a really great concept that I loved. Um, Called COIST, Company Intel Support Team. It was kind of a double duty of mine. It was really cool because we did have a 35 Fox analyst intel analyst in the COIS team. Um, but part of that, because I was a branch detail guy from MI, they were like, well, here, get some experience with MI stuff. And it was actually really cool because I got to see, how the collection process worked, and I got to see, how the targeting process worked and all that kind of fun
You
stuff.
do any human stuff? Like we had ours was our FSO. Our company
No,
FSO was our COIS team leader, and not formally like we had this team there that would help us, but the
yeah.
COIS team leader was like part of those
So,
conversations.
yeah, and okay, yeah. So let's not get anybody in trouble, because human is a very specific thing.
Fair.
We had a human collection
Not an
team.
MI guy, so I'm probably
Yeah.
like calling it something that it isn't.
And I actually, and after I went to MI school, I went to human school, and so I became a humans officer. So, um, humans is a very particular specialized thing, and we had a human collection team on our fob, and they weren't organic to our unit. They were
Right.
they were organic to a higher unit, but they got tasked down to us to support us in our AO. So I would meet with them occasionally just to debrief them or be like, hey, can you ask about X, Y, or Z collection
Yeah.
requirements? We're looking for information on yada yada yada, right? And then they would go out and collect it. And so yeah, there's definitely um,
And for the folks that like aren't don't have military background, like human is human intelligence. Like
it's talking to people. It's the
it's talk.
oldest form of intelligence. It's hey, it's spycraft. I mean, it's very dumbed down
Well, I
in
would
the
say there's
army.
varying levels of
Yeah,
that,
there's
right? Like
there's
I'm
definitely
having a random conversation with somebody in a
right.
bazaar to like I have
Yeah, and
active.
and low level, it's it's funny because there's only certain things you can do, depending on how qualified you are. And then not only how qualified you are, but what your mission is. There's only certain things you can do. You can ask certain questions, but you can't be like, hey, go find this out for me. You can't pay anybody at certain levels or, whatever. A lot of times it would be more reliant on somebody coming to you rather than seeking someone out. It's just things like that. It depends on what level you're at and how sensitive the people you're talking to are as far as like, is this guy a janitor or is this guy the head of the Ministry of Defense, right? And so,
Right.
but it's a very wide ranging, wide scoping endeavor. But yeah, so we did work some with the human guys. We did work some with signals intelligence. In Afghanistan, the signals intelligence was so basic, right? Because I mean, you're talking the Taliban. It's not like the NSA is required to crack
Like
any sort
literally
of codes.
Radio Shack. Radio Shack used
Oh
to be a
yeah,
thing, right?
yeah.
For the
For
super
the
young
younger
folks.
audience,
Yeah, yeah. Radio Shack was this place you could go to get like
and buy
electronic
radios.
devices.
And yeah, and so and it's actually funny. So here's a great story, real quick. We were the mortar platoon, and so we had mortars, which are these big tubes that you drop these huge rounds in, and then they go thunk, and then they fly off and they hit the
You
ground or
try
they
not
hit
to lose
above
your
the ground
hand
and
while you're
explode.
doing that.
Yeah, you try not to lose your hand. But so every morning, not every morning, every couple of mornings, um, we would get rocketed around sunrise from the mountains near our fob, across the river from our fob. And so we would go out and we would do what's called stand to. The mortars would go out and do stand because it was our job to fire back. And we had radar to tell us like a general area of where the rocket came from, whatever. And so we would adjust, our fire onto where it said. Um, but we would go out there and we'd be ready, So stand to is you just go out and you just get ready and, you wait for the attack and then you shoot back. And, and so we got rocketed and we fired back with the mortars and we had a guy, an interpreter, an Afghan interpreter in our squadron headquarters who was listening just on an open channel radio. They use these little ICOM radios the Taliban did.
Radio
And he
Shack.
was just yeah, it was from Radio Shack,
Yeah.
or whatever the Afghan equivalent of Radio Shack was. And so he's just like listening to the radio and he would pick up what the enemy was saying, relay it to our fire support officer who would relay it to us. And fire support officer sitting right next to him. And so rockets come in, radar tells us roughly where it is. we fire a round, right? Just one round. We shoot one round, and the, the Taliban who's firing the rockets at us, they get on their radio and they go, "Hey, we fired at the Americans, and they fired back, but they missed us. It was a couple hundred meters off to the right." And so the interpreter hears this, tells the FSO. The FSO tells us, "Hey, adjust fire this
Here's your
way.
new coordinates. Yeah.
Here's your new coordinates." We fire at that, and the guy goes, "Oh, they're getting closer. Now it's 200 meters below us." And he's like, "Up 200, fire for effect." And so we dropped 5 rounds, boom, 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 boom. And
I just got
and he's
chills, by the way. That word, fire for effect, like
yeah.
still gives me chills to this day.
Oh, I love it.
It is like being on the forward end of that and being the one who gets stuck. So like
Yeah.
people, like when I was an infantry platoon leader, I would have called you,
Mm-hmm.
and like I would have called you, like depending how far away I was from whatever outpost I was at, wherever you were located, or somebody with your capabilities was located. I
Yeah.
would get everyone from like 60 millimeter mortars that would go with me to like
Yeah.
triple sevens,
And
right?
we were firing 120 millimeter mortars, which are the rounds are about 40 pounds each.
Yeah,
They're gigantic.
yeah, those are big.
Yeah.
And they pack it, but yeah, you would hear fire, and every time like the hair on the back of your neck stands up because it
Yeah.
is like
Because the Scunyon's coming. But so hey, here's up 200 fire for effect, right? So we fire for effect, and and then we get a
and like
call.
right 200 repeat.
Yeah, we got a call, and it was like, "Oh, I'm wounded. They killed my partner, and so's wounded, and I'm wounded, and we got to get out of here, and but I'm gonna drag him off, and blah blah blah." And they go, "Repeat," which means and that's for anybody who's not in the military. You don't say repeat on the radio like, "Oh, say that again." You say again, because repeat means fire that fire mission again. Repeat that. And so we fired again, and then they could hear the other end of the line calling for the guys that were launching the rockets, and nobody replied. No, there was no reply. And so we just went, like, all
Best
right,
way to do
chalk
a
up 3.
battle damage assessment. There's no
Yeah,
mountain to climb.
exactly. Let the enemy do
Radio
it for you.
silence.
Yes, it was great. But yeah, and so we got a lot of mileage out of like the most basic intelligence stuff. Um, which is
Did you
not to
get one of
say,
those, like when I was in like my, again, first deployment, they used to give us
Mhm.
these COIS teams were just becoming a thing. Like
Yeah,
the idea that you would go out and collect your own SIGINT. That's essentially what you're talking about now, is
yeah,
signals intelligence, right?
yeah,
We had, I forgot what they were called, but there's like these backpacks for these antennas. These like,
yeah.
did you get any of those?
So I did not get one of those. What I got was an Afghan ICOM radio with an antenna that wove into the back of my plate carrier, my body armor, and I got an interpreter that would stand next to me on patrols, and we would just listen to the radio together. Which even at the time, I was like, this is stupid because I can't understand what's on the radio. Why don't we just give him the radio? Like what? Why am I carrying this radio? Give it to him, and then he doesn't have to stand right next to me the whole time. you know, um, why am I even out here? Like, but we did that. We didn't, you know, now there were systems that could, and I'm going to be vague because
You're not getting very
I'll,
trouble.
I'll be straight with you. I can't remember, exactly how much of that is like, you know, you don't want to give details about capabilities, but and I just don't remember. It's not that it's like, oh, this is super cool secret spooky stuff. It's not, but better safe than sorry, right? I don't want to put any of this out on Signal. But there are boxes that can, I mean, you see them in American cities, right? They detect gunshots. They're called like stingrays. And they detect the sound of a gunshot, and they can give you like
Just get you oriented back in the
yeah,
general
they can get
direction
you
it
a,
came
a
from.
direction. But the thing
Yeah.
is, if you put 3 of them out there, and then each of them can pick up a direction, then where those lines intersect is the general area where it came from, right? So you get stuff like that, and you get it for like radio signal triangulation is nothing new. It's nothing cosmic. It's not magic. We've been doing it since forever, since radios existed. Um, So, you can do stuff like that. You can do stuff like gunshot detection. We had mortar counterfire radars, like I was saying earlier. I mean, all that stuff, all of those things are intelligence collection assets. And so I did get, I don't even want to say versed, but, I got familiarized, very basic familiarization with a lot of those systems. So, but that wasn't my main thing at that point was breaking shit and hurting people. So,
I
which we did a lot of.
so I was, and we'll get into this, I think, in a later episode. But so not only was my battalion's AO the one directly below your squadron's AO, right?
Mhm.
Um, my battalion and 373 Cav and 132 infantry, like we have a little bit of a history establishing some bases that were within
Yeah,
your AO and on a previous deployment, right? Because
yeah,
typically these units they go back to the areas that they were
yeah,
previously deployed to because they know the terrain. They've got some level of
absolutely.
experience there, right? Within 132 infantry, so infantry battalion's got about 800 folks. You have a headquarters and headquarters company, or HHC.
Yep,
That's got your mortar platoon, right? So
yep,
like you were a mortar platoon leader. It's got your scout platoon, and then you've got like your battalion staff, right?
yeah,
And your medical folks.
yeah,
Well, and then you have like your Alpha Bravo Charlie companies. Like those are your standard rifle platoons, typically about 40 folks. There's 3 platoons within each company. And then there's a Delta company, right? It's your
yeah,
heavy weapons platoon. It's theoretically, so you send a light infantry unit, like in like traditional army doctrine, you would send a light infantry unit on the battlefield. There's always the possibility that they get exposed to like enemy tanks.
right.
Um, and they're only carrying like pew pews. So you need
Yeah,
something bigger than a pew pew to take out an enemy tank. And so you would bring this
yeah,
Delta platoon with you. But we would ride around on Humvees. But we had this, so we had Mark 19s, these like, think about a grenade, but like on a belt, right? To just
yeah.
machine gun of grenades.
It's
It's
a
great.
grenade machine gun, and I
It's great.
love the Mark
It's
19.
a wonderful thing. It gets dusty and clogs up really fast, but
Yeah,
until you get that first jam, it's a great weapon.
you
We
take
had
care of her, and she'll take care of you.
yeah. We had butterfly mounted like 240s and 249s. Like those were more effective. We had a 50 cal, which
Everybody
could just
loves a 50 cal.
love a 50 cal. And then we had what's called an ITAS, which fired a tow missile. And
Yep.
I'll keep it like whatever you can find on Wikipedia. But essentially, it's this. So TOW stands for tube
Tube launched,
launched,
optically
optically
tracked,
guided, no,
wire
optically
guided.
tracked, wire guided munition system. So it was this like
It's a missile.
this. It's a missile that you could steer
Yeah,
with your ITAS,
not super well. It's
but it was
not,
connected with a
but it's
wire. Like
yeah, yeah.
there's a wire, and this thing would
You can
travel
actually like joystick steer the thing,
if
and
you if you
it's not
cranked
like you're
it.
like doing loop to loops or nothing, but
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can
if you cranked it, it would like cut the wire, and the missile would
yeah.
follow the last command given. Anyway, we had these things.
We made a lot of money with those.
I think I fired like 26 of them
Oh
throughout
yeah,
my deployment.
they're
Like
awesome.
it was more than like any platoon had ever. And they're like, "Listen, you're an anti-tank platoon. What are you doing in the Hindu Kush Mountains in Afghanistan, firing 26 missiles?" And I would tell these stories to be like, "Well,
We're
you know,
killing 50 people.
the bad guys would hide behind rocks. You know what a 50 cal does? You know what a rock does to a 50 cal round? It bounces like the
Yeah,
like 50 cal's a
yeah.
don't get me wrong, it's an epic weapon system, but it's
You get a big
it's
enough rock, it's going to stop it. It's
it's
going
nothing
to
against Mother
ricochet off
Nature,
of it.
right?
Yeah,
So we would use the ITAS, which was this thing could see out to like 10 kilometers.
oh
It
yeah,
was heat traced, so like it was mostly used for like we used to use it for like intelligence gathering, right? If we could see
yeah,
really far. If you were climbing a mountain in like the night, the
yeah.
rocks around you are very cold, but you're giving off a lot of body heat. Like it was very easy to
Absolutely.
find you. Like we people these
Counterintuitively, if it's daytime, the rocks may be a lot warmer than you,
it's true.
and you show up as cooler.
It's
Yeah,
true.
the ITAS is an amazing system. Yeah,
So we would like we like used to see people like crawling on the mountainside into these firing positions, and we're like, you're just watching it, like, what is this guy doing? Like, all right,
yeah,
missile away.
yeah,
But anyway, we would they would get behind these big rocks, they would get into these fighting positions, these like they would build fighting
yeah.
positions up in the
And these
mountains.
fighting positions are 100 years old.
Yeah, they're
You know, it's the same fighting positions that their grandfather fought the British from. You know, with bolt action rifles.
and their fathers
Probably the
fought
same bolt
the
action rifle
Russians
that.
and the Soviets,
Yeah,
right? Like, yeah,
yeah, probably the
100%.
same bolt action rifles that they're shooting at you with now.
But we would detonate these tow rounds, these tube launched, optically tracked, wire guided missiles. Right, I got that right that time. And we would so if you were in this fighting position, I wasn't going to aim at the fighting position because there's a big
You aim
rocket in
above
front of
it.
you. I'm going to aim right behind you, and
Yeah.
I'm going to let the concussion and everything else that comes off that deal with whatever.
Oh
And so
yeah.
actually, when I got back from my first deployment, there's at like army.mil or whatever. There's actually a story about this. At Redstone Arsenal, they had ironically a bunch of air defenders
Mm-hmm.
hosting this like army missile conference, and I actually got to go in with one of my squad leaders, and we actually presented like how to use an anti-tank weapon in the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan. It was kind of a really cool experience.
That is really cool.
So, all right, we've been at this for a little while. So now that the booze is flowing and everything, I can ask the question. Like, so I know for my own part, one of the reasons I really wanted to do this podcast, I'd originally like this has evolved so many times. This is our very first episode, but
Yeah.
in my
We're
mind, this thing
winging
has
it.
this thing has evolved so many times. Like, I
Yeah.
wanted to do something. I always wanted to write a book, right? I
Yeah.
always wanted to write. And then I thought, like, I was an avid reader back in the day, but the reality is I don't really read much anymore. But I do listen to a lot of podcasts. And I was like, well, maybe while I'm doing this research for this book, it would be cool to like publish some content and start a podcast. And it was strictly going to be about like the history of the war in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And then like as you're doing that research, you're starting like for me, I was starting to relive some experiences and that kind of stuff and realizing
Yeah.
like there's stuff still unresolved
Yeah.
that like
There's still stuff in that box that I haven't unpacked yet.
yeah, so maybe it would be a great avenue to start talking about those types of things, and then
Yeah.
it led me down the path of like what support are veterans getting today, and have we left them behind, and all these other conversations. And so I still think that like as a channel, I still want to publish like a series of videos that are maybe more self-guided. They're narrated, they're animated, like
Yeah.
they're the history of the United States involvement in Afghanistan. We might even go like backwards in time and talk about the British and the Soviets and everybody else, Alexander the Great, and everybody else who's tried to invade Afghanistan and failed.
Graveyard of empires, brother.
Um, but but at the same time, like for me, I'm hoping that this podcast helps like restart a conversation that I think we stopped having several years ago about. I mean, if you think about it, we have a generation, like the millennial generation, a generation that grew up with a country at war. It was the America's longest war,
Yeah.
like a generation where our formidable years, we were, whether you participated or not, like we were
Yeah.
at war as a country. And so
Yeah.
like we are gonna we are gonna have to pay the consequences of that for decades to come, right? Like
Absolutely.
for as long as that generation is walking this earth. And so I kind of hope that this podcast is an opportunity to like I'm going to say re-kickstart a conversation that I think we stopped having a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's still a lot of things veterans like face on a day-to-day basis and struggle with on a day-to-day basis. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to make this like every veteran is struggling with PTSD or whatever the case. Like that's not a fact. That's
Sure.
not the reality. But there are a lot of people who you know put their lives on the line, volunteered to be separated from their families or put off starting a family or whatever the case may be, um, to go off and serve for whatever their motivation was.
Yeah.
And some of them came out of that unscathed, and they're the fortunate ones. And some of them came off, they didn't come back, right? And then some of
Right.
them came back with mental and or physical wounds, or both.
Absolutely.
And so, I think that there's a lot we should remember and do as a nation, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to do my best not to get like super political with this. That's not the point. It's not really about who's making certain policy decisions. It's more like what the impact of certain policy decisions have on the veteran community and how we can. I think we need to do better. I was researching like veteran homelessness rates, and the VA's actually done a lot of
Oh yeah.
decent work in that over like
Yeah.
they were actively like they saw the don't get me wrong, like housing insecurity is a problem for a lot of Americans, but the proportionally, like if you just look at kind of from a per capita standpoint, veterans just suffered at a higher rate
Yeah.
than most other populations.
Yep.
I say most other, not necessarily all others, but the VA has like gone out and over the last several years has like you can see the trend charge. Right. Don't get me wrong, we still got a lot of work to do, but like really tackling that problem. But I do think that there's a lot of other problems, surrounding both mental and physical health. It's not just about mental health, right? Because if you
Yeah.
don't have strong mental health, I think it takes a toll physically, which can impact the quality of life and your ability to like be with
Absolutely.
your family and raise your kids and everything else. So for me, I know that was a little bit of a rant, but I really hope that as we go through this journey, like we'll get some more foundation, more structure around this. But we're
Yeah.
going to bring in a lot of really great guests that I think are going to be able to tell their story and um, help put a face
Yeah.
behind.
Give some context.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I'm 100% with you. And I think it's really important to tell these stories, to learn these lessons. I think we owe it to ourselves, and I think we owe it to future generations, right? You know, listen, fingers crossed, we are never in another war, right? But that's history tells us that's probably not the case, right? So I think we owe it to ourselves. I think we owe it to future generations. I think one of the things I do want to focus on is policy. Um, the intersection of policy that impacts veterans and other groups. Um, I think one of the things I want to focus on is mental health. Um, you know, and you bring up mental health and physical health, and like you said, they're very very linked, and they're linked in ways that most people don't even understand. There have been books written. It's gotten relatively popular in mental health circles recently, but there's a book called "The Body Keeps the Score," and it details. And there's other books that deal with these things. One's called Invisible Heroes, um, that deal with the issue of PTSD, of trauma, and what trauma does to your body, what mental trauma does to your body. And I'll tell you right now, like so and I ended up with a med board out of the army. Right, I was medically discharged, medically retired from the army, um, mainly due to my PTSD. One of the things that I had been struggling with for years, yeah, dealing with for years, was temporomandibular joint disorder, right? My jaw will ache, it'll get tight, it'll pop really loudly, very painfully. It'll hurt to chew. My teeth will hurt on my right side, especially my right side. When I was going through my med board, I went to the dentist. It's just one of the things you do. You go to the dentist. Um, and the dentist, is this nice, very nice civilian lady, uh, hours from where I lived. But I went there and she's like doing my exam and she's checking my jaw because I had said, like, when you go through a med board or when you go through anything like that, you tell them all the things that are wrong with you, all the things that you're like, hey, this, I've got pain here. I did this to my shoulder or my arm or whatever. And so my jaw was one of the things I brought
like
up.
just running down a list.
It is. And it's very comprehensive. Um, and I put the one of the reasons I was seeing the dentist was for my jaw, and she started asking me all these questions about, like, did you deploy, did you see, and there all these questions are questions I get asked from mental health, behavioral health providers, right? Did you ever see anybody killed? Did you ever kill anybody? Were you ever in direct threat of your life? Like, all sorts of stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, I was on a combat deployment, it was very kinetic, as we like to say in the army. Yeah, I'm getting med boarded for PTSD. And she goes, yeah, that makes sense. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, temporomandibular joint disorder. She's like, it's highly comorbid with PTSD, right? Because your brain creates a stress response at a higher rate almost all the time, right? Depending on how severe your PTSD is. Like, you're always in a more heightened state of fight or flight. It's a spectrum, but you're generally further along that spectrum than people without PTSD. And that'll do things like cause you to clench your jaw when you're not noticing. It will tighten your muscles, it'll tighten your shoulders, it'll tighten your neck, right? And it can cause all these downstream effects that people don't even realize. I didn't realize until I started going through a lot of this process and I started reading about PTSD. And I had been in therapy for over a decade by the point that they were like, all right, we're, you know, you're getting nowhere. We're just going to med board you. Um, and so when I really started reading into it myself is when I found a lot of the literature on the physical effects of mental health and trauma. And it goes beyond PTSD, right? I mean, depression has physical effects. You can't, it's like the Matrix. You can't separate the mind from the body. They're very linked. And so, that sort of thing is very near and dear to my heart. I am currently going through school to be a therapist. And because I was given so much excellent care and I still receive excellent care, um, shout out to
I was gonna say quick
River
shout out.
Post Traumatic Stress Services at River Hospital in Alexandria Bay, New York. Um, the team there is amazing. I mean, miracle workers, just phenomenal. And the whole team is just beautiful, beautiful people. Just the most kind hearted, wonderful, amazing people you'll ever meet in your life. I know I've had my worst day. You know, now barring something terrible happening to one of my immediate family members, right? Um, I've had my worst day. If I live a long life and I go before my wife and I go before my kids, like my worst day is behind me. Um, Nothing's gonna top it, right? And I have that perspective that I can lean back on. The flip side of that coin is that worst day still affects me negatively to this day, you know. Um, and so there's a lot to unpack there. And yeah, a lot of people have experiences just like us, and a lot of people don't. And I think could benefit from hearing those conversations, just like I can benefit from hearing the conversations of somebody who's been through something that I could never experience. Um, I think it's important that we all learn from each other.
I'm very much so looking forward to this journey. I think it's been a fun conversation. But